The man who built your iPhone is now running Apple. Every major player in the AI race is building a model. Apple is building the chip that runs them all. And today, Apple handed that chip and the company around it to the man who built it. This is Market Truths. I'm Ethan Cole. Cook's exit. Tim Cook became Apple's CEO on August 24, 2011. Steve Jobs was still alive, but only just. Everyone knew the timeline was weeks. On October 5th, Jobs died, and Silicon Valley spent the next year explaining, with considerable confidence, why Apple was finished without him. Cook then grew the company from $350 billion to $4 trillion. Annual revenue nearly quadrupled. He launched the Apple Watch, which became the best-selling watch in the world. He launched AirPods. He built a services empire worth $96 billion a year. The stock returned 1,933%, nearly 4 times the S&P 500 over the same period. The obituary writers were off by about $3.65 trillion. Today, Cook announced his exit. His successor is John Ternus, a mechanical engineer who has spent 25 years at Apple making the things you hold in your hand. Most people listening to this will Google his name. That happened with Cook too in 2011. Worth remembering how that turned out. Here are the essentials. First, the handover happens September 1st. But Cook isn't disappearing. He becomes executive chairman, which at Apple is a real job, managing the company's political relationships in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and New Delhi. That work, keeping Apple's supply chain intact through trade wars, tariffs, and geopolitical pressure, has been as important to the $4 trillion market cap as any product launch. Ternus runs the company. Cook runs the world's most complex diplomatic relationship portfolio. Johnny Sroji, the chip architect behind Apple Silicon, is promoted to Chief Hardware Officer. The structure signals continuity, not reinvention. Second, Ternus has spent 25 years making Apple's hardware impeccable. He led the Apple Silicon transition, a move away from Intel that the industry said Apple couldn't execute cleanly, which Apple executed so cleanly that the Mac became the dominant premium laptop within 2 years. He has overseen every iPhone since the 5, every Mac, every AirPod, the Apple Watch Ultra, and the just-launched iPhone Air, the thinnest iPhone ever made. John Gruber, the most credible Apple analyst writing today, said it simply in January, quote, "What complaints does anyone have about Apple hardware over the last 5 years? I can't think of any that are serious." End quote. Third, the one unresolved problem Ternus inherits is AI, and the clock is ticking. Apple's previous AI chief left in late 2025. His replacement came from Google. The upgraded Siri that Apple is committing to launch this year runs on Google's Gemini, meaning the company famous for owning every layer of its technology is currently renting the most strategically important one. WWDC is in June, 2 months before Ternus officially takes over. What Apple announces there is, in effect, the opening statement of his tenure. And fourth, the market barely moved because this has been the least kept secret in tech for 6 months. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman identified Ternus as the front runner back in October. The New York Times ran a full profile in January. When COO Jeff Williams retired quietly in 2025, those watching closely read it as confirmation. Once the number 2 is gone, the board has a clean reason to move. And they moved from a position of strength. A $4 trillion market cap, the iPhone 17 cycle running well, no crisis forcing their hand. That kind of succession is how you do it right. The machine Cook built. The real Cook story is not the stock chart. It is what he did to deserve the stock chart. Jobs built Apple on personal genius, on an instinct for what people would want before they knew they wanted it, honed over 30 years until it was indistinguishable from the company itself. When Jobs died, that instinct died with him. What Cook understood was that you cannot replace genius with more genius. You replace it with systems. You take the culture that produced the genius and you engineer it into a process that keeps producing great decisions even when no single person in the room has Jobs' taste. He also built the supply chain that nobody talks about. An iPhone is assembled from components sourced across 30 countries. Keeping that machine running through US-China trade wars, a global pandemic, a semiconductor shortage, and an Iranian war that disrupted global shipping, all while maintaining gross margins above 45%, is the kind of operational achievement that does not make headlines, because it is invisible when it works. Cook made it work for 15 years without a single catastrophic failure. That is the other half of the $4 trillion. Cook built the machine. Ternus runs the machine now. The man who runs it now. Ternus grew up in Pennsylvania, studied mechanical engineering at Penn, and spent one college summer building a mechanical arm that people with quadriplegia could operate using head movements. He did not build it because it was a technically interesting problem. He built it because someone could not feed themselves, and he thought he could fix that. The constraint was not the engineering, the constraint was the human being at the end of it. That instinct, start with the real-world constraint, work backwards to the solution, never add complexity the problem does not require, runs through every product his teams have shipped at Apple. It is why Apple Silicon works. Anyone can build a fast chip. Building a chip that is also fast enough, thin enough, cool enough, and cheap enough to make it scale inside a device that fits in your pocket. That requires someone who has never forgotten that engineering exists to serve the person holding the thing. He joined Apple in 2001 to work on the cinema display. Unglamorous work. Displays teach you tolerance, stacking, and heat management. How to make something that looks effortless while concealing a cascade of competing constraints. He spent 25 years doing that at an increasingly ambitious scale until the thing he was designing constraints around was the chip inside every iPhone on Earth. The race. Nobody announced. Apple never named a shortlist. A public race would have created exactly the politics Cook spent 15 years suppressing. But inside Cupertino, everyone knew who was running and what each candidate meant. 4 names: Craig Federighi, Senior Vice President of Software Engineering, Apple's most charismatic executive, funny on stage, sharp in a room, the face of iOS at every WWDC. He loves dismantling assumptions, calls things overhyped before others dare to, questions the expensive bets. He reportedly said AI was overhyped early on. He had doubts about the Vision Pro spend. He may have been right on both, but the board was not looking for the person who was right about what to skip. They wanted someone ready to go all in on what comes next before it is obvious. Federighi was passed over. Eddie Q, Senior Vice President of Services. Q built Apple's second empire from nothing. The App Store, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, Apple Pay. $96 billion a year in services revenue. Every music label, every studio, every bank that integrated Apple Pay did so partly because Q made them want to. The case against him was simple. At 62, his run would be short. Apple's board wanted someone with a decade or more ahead of them. Q was passed over. Jeff Williams, former Chief Operating Officer. Cook's operational mirror, the one who made sure the machine ran every single day precisely without needing credit for it. If you wanted another Cook, Williams was the answer. Then he retired in 2025, quietly, before the race concluded. His exit cleared the field. It probably also moved the timeline. Once the obvious number 2 is gone, the board has a clean reason to act. Sometimes the most consequential decision a CEO candidate makes is knowing when to step aside. And John Ternus, Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering, the quiet one, who had already thought through the answer before anyone else finished asking the question. Around 2018, Apple debated putting a laser depth sensor in every iPhone model. Ternus argued to limit it to the Pro line, protect the margin, earn the feature's cost, don't add complexity for its own sake. The board filed that away. He took over the iPhone in 2020, delivered Apple Silicon. At 50, he has a decade ahead of him. His argument was probably the simplest one in the room. AI is a hardware problem, and I am the best hardware person alive. Effective September 1st, he is the CEO of Apple. Why the hardware bet is right. Every major AI company right now is racing to build the biggest model. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta. The logic is, whoever has the most capable model wins the era. The race has been consuming hundreds of billions in capital, electricity, and talent. Apple has watched all of this and made a different bet. The model is not the moat. The chip is. Here is why that bet is smarter than it looks. Foundation model prices have been dropping roughly 80% per year since 2023. GPT-4 level capability, which cost dollars per query 2 years ago, now costs fractions of a cent. The trend line is clear. Within a few years, powerful AI will be effectively free to access. And when the intelligence layer commoditizes, the value shifts to whoever owns the interface and the hardware. Apple owns both. Apple Silicon is already the fastest consumer chip for on-device AI inference, the kind of AI that runs locally without sending data to a server. This matters more than any benchmark because it is the only architecture that can handle the things people care most about. Privately. Their health data, their financial information, their personal communications. No cloud AI company can offer that. Their business model requires the server. Apple's does not. When enterprises start asking which AI assistant their employees can use without violating HIPAA or GDPR, the answer that runs entirely on-device becomes the only compliant answer in the room. Ternus built the chip that makes all of this possible. He understands at an engineering level that no software executive in Cupertino could match exactly how much further Apple Silicon can go, and what it would take to get there. The AI advantage Apple is positioning for is not theoretical. It is already in your pocket. It just needs someone who knows how to build the next generation of it. That person is now running Apple. The quote. Cameron Rogers, a former Apple engineering manager, told the New York Times in January, quote, "If you want to make an iPhone every year, Ternus is your guy." End quote. Rogers said it as a compliment. He was also describing the thing Apple's board realized they needed more than anything else. Someone who would never ship a bad iPhone. In the AI era, the iPhone is the most important personal AI computing device in the world. Making sure it is never bad is, it turns out, a full-time job for the most talented hardware person alive. The read. Cook's greatest achievement was the one nobody credits him for. He took a company that ran on one man's genius and rebuilt it as a system. An organization so well designed that it keeps generating great products without needing to know whose taste it is expressing. That is rarer than being a visionary. Visionaries are one in a generation. Systems that outlive visionaries are harder to build and worth more over time. Ternus is the first beneficiary of that system getting a chance to run it. He is also the clearest expression of what the system believes. That the future of AI is not in who trains the biggest model, but in who builds the best vessel to run it in. Apple Silicon is a 3-generation head start over every other consumer chip for on-device intelligence. That lead does not close quickly. And as foundation model prices continue collapsing towards zero, the value of running a great model locally, privately, instantly without a server, only grows. The AI era rewards whoever controls the interface between human and intelligence. Apple controls the device. Apple controls the chip. Ternus built both. The question everyone is asking, can a hardware engineer run an AI company, is the wrong question. The right question is, in a world where the models are free and the silicon is the moat, who do you want holding the silicon? Apple just answered that. That's Market Truths for Tuesday, April 21st, 2026.